Hello everybody, welcome to the Sanctum. Today we're going to review a Doctor Strange comic that was requested by one of my patrons, Joshua. And this is issue number 70, volume 2. It came out in 1985. And I quite like this one. It's, you know what, we'll get into it. Let's just talk about it. Okay. So, got a nice little beastie on the front here. You can see people getting zappy bolted. All right, let's get into this. So we have a very cool issue. I've put the writers, editors, pencilers, inkers, and so forth down in the description. So if you want to read those details, go for it. I love that this opens with Doc in his sanctum. You get to see a little piece of his, well, the exterior of the Sanctum Sanctorum. It's a little more simplified than it would become after this was published, but you see the classic skylight and some of the windows, and you get to see Doc just doing his thing. He's very much in his element. This is, well, being that it was in the 80s, it's not like the heyday of Doctor Strange where it was all Kirby dots and so forth, but you still have a lot of exclamatory statements. He's still casting in rhyme. Some of his spells are in iambic pentameter still. They do get away from that the longer that Doc goes on. But you know, hey, it's one of those clever little gimmicks that helped him pick up steam when he first came out in the 60s. It was very much the West becoming interested, invested, and at times very appropriative of Eastern mysticism. So you get to see a lot of that in his books. But also, Doc is a more introverted philosophical character. He's definitely not like the run into a fight, rock'em sock'em punch'em type of character. He can fire a good zappy bolt and he is good at martial arts, but, you know, he's a doctor first. So he's definitely going to look for solutions based on that first. If he has to fight, he will. But anyway, there's one of those videos that's going to be coming down the pike about why I like Doctor Strange so much and how I see him as a character. And there's really good blog posts and writers that have done turns on Doctor Strange that I'll discuss at some point. But anyway, shout out Jim Shooter. He was the editor-in-chief of Marvel, the House of Ideas at this time, but Stan Lee still gets a little bit of credit for this. All right, so Doc is casting. He's working on unleashing the dark forces from the pits in which they cower. There are things that happen prior to this that I don't want to discuss too much because I do want you to read this issue and the ones like immediately prior to it to get a little more context. But check out all the little artifacts and mystic doodads that he has. Obviously, any good sorcerer is going to have ancient tomes sitting on his bookshelf and on his tables. You may have that looks kind of like you know what? I don't want to spoil it. I'm just going to keep going. Okay, so in the middle of his casting, Doc gets interrupted by a knock at the door, and it breaks his concentration, which, if you're a sorcerer, that's not a good thing. A lot of these spells are very intensive. And, well, if you saw Spider-Man No Way Home, you would realize how much of a problem it can be if you break Steven's concentration while he's trying to work on a spell. So he's struggling to keep his focus, and you can see him right here. Back you forces, most accursed, get you from this blessed place, flee before the light untainted, born of the all-seeing face. So yeah, we still got a little bit of the rhyming there. And you know, my little stream box is covering it, but he does call on the Vishanti at this point. I'll just hide myself briefly so that you can see it. Hands of Ashtur, hordes of Hoggoth, heed my call, empower my spell that the powers which oppose me be returned to where they dwell. So that's 2 of the 3 members of the Vishanti. The only one missing is Agamotto, but we do have a reference to Agamotto. So he's exhausted. He spent a lot of energy trying to cast the spell, and it was interrupted. He did what he could. So this is one of those things that I find really cool when a writer remembers it is that spellcasting and sorcery take a lot out of you physically, not just mentally. And recharging your physical strength is as much part of doing magic as, all of the occult and arcane stuff. So he's not really in the position to receive visitors, but he's going to do it anyway. And it's the US Army. So you have a general that rolls in and tells him in no uncertain terms that he thinks that sorcery is a load of hokum and that it's BS, essentially. There are some colorful words that he uses. So from behind him, you hear Doc saying, I've heard that sentiment before, but never quite in those words. And he emerges looking absolutely dapper. 3-piece suits never steered him wrong. Dr. Strange has always had a great sense of style. And he is absolutely rocking this look. So congratulations, Stephen. Silver Fox achieved. He introduces himself, and one of my favorite recurring characters are Sarah Wolf, who he calls his business manager. She's a little more than that. But again, I do want you to delve into the world here so that you can get to know her a little more and find out why she's so important. She comes back at some really interesting times in his life, and you don't get to see her developed a lot here, but she's someone that he relies on at this period of time. So Wong is not in this issue. He's off doing other things, but you do see him come back a little later. For now, Sarah is his right hand. So he wants to know what their business is, and they explain that a lot of their weapons are disappearing and being replaced with otherworldly creatures or weapons that they don't understand. And they want him to figure it out because they have run out of options. And coming to Stephen last is something that happens quite a bit in his books. So he tries to get more information. He really wants to know where a specific weapon is so that he can go protect it, and they won't tell him because it's classified, of course. So, well, he pulls out the Eye of Agamotto and is like, I'm going to just get in there anyway. So we're used to seeing Doc in the modern age with an eyeball coming out of his head more organically, but in a lot of the earlier titles, it was something that was a manifestation of the Eye of Agamotto. So here you can see that very clearly. I really love that the eyeball tends to float out of the amulet and take its place on his forehead, and he's able to activate the Eye of Agamotto so that he can see through illusions. Sometimes he can use it to read people's minds, other things like that. It's a sort of, I would say, mystic magnifying glass of sorts. So this is a little off-putting, I'm sure, for the people standing around, but he assures them that this is just another day in the life. Everything's fine. He's probably not even going to remember this afterward. And he goes digging around in the general's brain. So, calling upon the mystic Eye of Agamotto, Strange soon finds the location of the silo in the general's mind. So now he knows where to go. He has a mission. He's going to save the weapon from whoever the antagonist is, turning it into things that are going to cause a lot of problems. So he steps into one of his weird little portals. I love the art in these books. The 80s had some really cool moments in it. In the 60s, it was definitely more of like an acid trip experience. Kirby dots everywhere. It was definitely like an MC Escher painting on LSD. But here you get weird spirals and overlapping dimensions. It's weird. You know he's in a portal somehow, but it's not like we're used to now with the sparks that you see in the movies. It's still weird as hell, though. And that's one thing that I think Doctor Strange books should always have. Weirdness. It should be weird. It should be uncomfortable a little bit. It should push you out of your comfort zone, challenge you, make you think, freak out a little bit. But it's fun. So, does his little parlor trick and goes off to travel between dimensions. And this is a good callback to some of that 60s vibe. You've got weird dimensions, overlapping elements that wouldn't normally make sense. They're kind of pressing on the fourth wall just a little bit. They're kind of overlapping other boxes and having things not really line up the way that they should in a flat medium. But I really dig this. You've got a good requisite eyeball floating around in there, as you really should. And you've got like weird staircases and things going into pockets and dimensions that they probably shouldn't. But this is, again, a day in the life. You give Doc a mission like this. Hey, go solve a magic problem. Being someone who travels through weird dimensions is just part of the gig. So what's going on here? He recognizes the antagonist, and it's somebody that he had dealt with before previously. And one thing about Doctor Strange is that he really values people's word. He values his own word and holds that in very high esteem. So if he beats you or gets you to a draw and makes you swear an oath or a vow or promise to leave Earth alone in this dimension and not bother it anymore, he expects you to follow through. Otherwise, the consequences could be dire. So you see him referencing that. He talks about a warlord in Kobar and some of the people that are there that he had previously fought and said, hey, leave my realm alone. And they promised, but looks like they broke their promise. So what ends up happening in the next few pages is he finds out why this person is apparently breaking their promise. It is a side effect of this warlord doing some stuff that he probably shouldn't with his own sorcerer, and a fight breaks out, as it's wont to do, and Doc gets to do his really cool multiplication illusion. We got to see him use this in the movies in, I think, Infinity War, where he was fighting Thanos. And it's a very cool, very, I would say, somewhat regular part of his repertoire. So, hey, if you're fighting off a horde of people and you're one man, why not solve the problem and become multiple? There's another comic that uses this to a completely different effect, and we'll review that at some point. It's Triumph and Torment, which is a really gorgeous graphic novel where he goes on an adventure with Doctor Doom. But yeah, it's no, it's Into Shambhala. I'm sorry. Triumph and Torment's also good, but Into Shambhala is the one I'm thinking of that has the gorgeous art, and he multiplies himself for a completely different purpose. If you know, you know. But yeah, he ends up getting the better of his foes at the moment, and then what ends up happening is the weapon he was looking for is a missile with a nuclear warhead. And in order to impress upon this warlord how dire those can be left in the wrong hands, he shows the warlord a vision of the devastation and havoc that a missile like that would wreak on his planet and on his world. He shows him the people getting vaporized, the nuclear fallout, the starvation, the wasteland that a nuclear explosion causes, and just gives him a taste of the suffering that it would cause. And the warlord kind of falls to his knees, is very overcome with emotion that he would unleash something on his own people. And once he's gotten the point, Doctor Strange breaks him out of that. And, you know, he realizes, hey, that was all an illusion. That wasn't real. And Doctor Strange is like, no, but I think you understand what I was trying to show you. And, you know, the warlord says, that's really a thing. You guys have these weapons? You just make them where you're from? And Steven says, thousands, I'm told. And this is where it starts pivoting from, like, you know, your average comic book storyline where there's a task with a foe, you beat the foe, you get the MacGuffin, you come back, everything's fine. This is where you start to see the philosophy of Doctor Strange and his kind of unique pocket of the Marvel Universe kind of come into play. Like, this is the 80s, this is still in the Cold War. Spycraft, people are still, not as much, but people are still very much aware of what could happen if, you know, Russia at the time and the United States were to launch their nuclear warheads at each other or anyone else. They're fighting proxy wars in Afghanistan during this time. And, you know, you start to see that a lot of the problems that we had back in the 80s, we're still having now with unchecked militarization and just rampant escalation of fighting and war, just for what? And I think aptly, the warlord calls that madness, just creating these weapons and having thousands of them. And Stephen goes back to the Sanctum, having saved the day once again. The general's not exactly happy that Stephen's not telling him everything. He wants to know all the details. Stephen isn't going to tell him. He replies that his name would mean nothing to you. You will simply have to accept my word that he wants nothing more to do with our world. So in Stephen's mind, it is absolutely settled. The general is pissed off, storms away, but this last panel, I think, makes the whole comic to me. After having seen Oppenheimer and having it end with the conversation with Einstein about setting the atmosphere and setting the world on fire, and Oppenheimer kind of musing, maybe we did set the world on fire by splitting the atom and, creating a weapon. Humans have that tendency to explore, to discover, and then we make weapons out of it and we hurt each other and we're self-destructive, but we're still worth saving. And Dr. Strange, being a physician first, he sees those ugly corners of humanity. He sees the dark results of what happens when our curiosity gets the better of us. And he's not someone that often deals with the military. That's more Captain America, Iron Man. I'm looking at Doc on the screen and my whole thoughts are just Doctor Strange. But yeah, this is not somebody that tangles with the military very often. And there's a lot to be said there about, the overlap between medicine and military might. But his musing here, you see, he thinks us all to be quite mad. And I'm very much afraid that he might be right. I love that for a good ending. It's not something that you often see in superhero books, where they get to have these moments of, geopolitical awareness and not be overly heavy-handed about it. You can read a Captain America book, you could read Falcon, you could read any number of street-level heroes, and they'll discuss the implications of humanity's self-destruction and our tendency to just, for whatever reason, discover something and then immediately turn it into something that causes harm. And Doctor Strange is a man that swore an oath to cause no harm. First, do no harm, right? What's he going to do, though? Is he going to go obliterate all the weapons? No. But he's at least going to leave that to somebody else to deal with. He probably agrees. I would feel like Doctor Strange is more anti-war than he is anything else. He definitely sat the Civil War out the first time. I think he regretted that later, but, while your friends are fighting and everybody's being forced to pick a side, I can't blame him for just fucking off to a cave for a few years. Honestly, mood. But, yeah, there's a lot to be said about this particular issue dealing with nuclear war, nuclear weapons, and the whole atmosphere that it creates globally for people. We're at the mercy of folks with trillions of dollars in funding and an itchy trigger finger. And we don't have someone like Doctor Strange that can just go and, magic away that kind of impulse. So it's one of those things that I feel like we would do good to keep in mind, especially, again, since Oppenheimer came out, is just being mindful of the limits of our discovery and the kind of motivations that we're using our discovery for. There's so much potential with nuclear energy, which I know someone like Kyle Hill will very much go to bat for. But for whatever reason, we just keep falling into the same trap. We discover something new and then we try to figure out the best way to weaponize it. I feel like humanity has a chance to take a different path. So Doctor Strange is one of those guys that I definitely like reading because he's the type of guy that takes a different path. So in the interest of causing no harm, to be a healer, to be a protector. I feel like that's a really good vibe for his book. I don't typically rate these on scales of like 1 to 10 or put them in tiers. It's not really fair to the books. It's not fair to the character. His books inhabit a different corner of the Marvel universe, and it's definitely not like a rock'em sock'em punch'em type of character. He's going to be more analytical. He's a little more introverted, but he gets to do cool things. He gets to go places a lot of other heroes can't and probably couldn't handle. So this one, I feel like you should go read, dig into it a little more. I went through it a little quickly and I skimmed over a lot of plot details because I don't want to give everything away. This is not going to be a situation like some media review channels where they literally talk you through every step of the plot. I don't need you to talk me through every step of the plot. I've seen the movie, I've read the book. Tell me what you thought. So that's where I want to focus these on. Stay tuned. Join me for the next one. Let me know what you think about this one in the comments if you've read it. If you haven't read it, but you want to, we can leave information in the comments below. I don't encourage people to surf the 7 seas, but if you have to in order to get it where you live, I definitely understand. I do recommend, though, that if you find yourself in that situation, whenever possible, do support the artists. Do support the publishers. Go to your local comic shop, start a pull list, or subscribe to digital comics. There's a lot of different platforms that you can do that on for very little money. Or go to the library. I'm a big fan of libraries. Tell them that you want to read comic books and see what they have and talk to the librarian about which ones that you can pull, because there's a lot of big omnibus volumes that you can go through and have them get for the library's collection. You can read through those big, several 100-page collections of comics and still get a really good experience out of it. So no matter how you get your comics, at least read them and support a library if you can't support the publishers with your money financially. And, like, subscribe, do whatever you want to do if you found this video cool. Or if you want to join in, I have a Patreon. Subscribe, share, and we'll see you in the next one.